taking it from the wide global level, what can leaders do? Because obviously everybody's using AI. So if you step out of it and say, actually, I'm not going to use it, you are going to put yourself at a bit of a disadvantage.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how can you balance the threats with the positives?
Yeah, it's a difficult question, but I think there are some things people can do. And yeah, to be clear, I'm not anti-technology or anti-AI. I run a company that's based on AI technology, so I think that it's a good thing overall. But I think there's a few things that leaders can do, and there's probably two sides to it. I think the first is that we need to all, if we're running companies or in charge of these projects, think really carefully about what tools are we using and what behaviors are we therefore rewarding. So to give you an example, and this isn't a sort of advert or an admonition of any one company or companies in particular, in the heart of the platform that we're building at Versapia, we were using OpenAI as an API plugin for our engine, our AI culture expert. And actually recently we decided to switch it over to Anthropic for a couple of reasons, but primarily because I had real sort of concerns about data and security with OpenAI's policies. But also they just seem to have a huge disregard for safety. And in the same way, you know, sticking with the nuclear analogy, you know, you can't just open a nuclear power plant, but apparently you can push GPT 5.2 just in a software update that nobody really knows about. And I just think there's more financial incentive there when you look at them pursuing ads and different things than there is in any other company. Whereas, you know, Anthropic have always been more safety focused, and there are some sort of nuances in terms of how the technology works that I think are better for what we do. So I think, firstly, leaders should be thinking about, if we're using AI tools, which ones are we using and how well does that align with our beliefs about how AI should be developed? Because ultimately, us switching over, we're a small company, it doesn't make a huge amount of difference. But if a lot of companies do switch to more safety-focused companies, then naturally the market will make companies focus more on safety. And I think then there's sort of community stuff we can be doing. I think, you know, we need to be talking to sort of people in government about it. We need to be talking to people who have a platform about it. You know, I know Wales has just appointed an AI minister, which is probably a good starting point. So getting governments and public figures to look at this stuff is really important. And having these sorts of conversations is really key. And then I think the other side of it is the impact on the future of work. So even if no bad things happen at the sort of humanity level, we are going to see a huge amount of displacement. And, you know, the likelihood is we end up in a place, who knows when, you know, maybe 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, could be longer than that, where all the things we need to live comfortably cost a lot less. We don't need to work anywhere near as much. And, you know, people are then able to release themselves from the shackles of work. Healthcare's better, people live longer, you know, transportation's better, all these kinds of things. A lot of our energy and food requirements are sorted. But there's a couple of issues with that. The first being that if we do ever reach that state, what does that mean for people's identities and how they see themselves? And that's a bigger question. But in the meantime, I think the path to that sort of abundance, as people like to call it, is a pretty rocky road for a lot of people. It's not going to be just, oh, today we're here and tomorrow we've got abundance. It's going to be a lot of displacement and a lot of job disruption and a lot of people, you know, struggling to adapt along the way. And so I think leaders need to really think about, yes, we should be adopting technology because, as you say, you fall behind competitively if you don't, and you do have a responsibility for your company to succeed so you can pay people and you can do all the things you've committed to doing. But we need to think about how we're using that technology and how it impacts the people in our organizations. Because we've seen this massive wave of redundancies in big companies and small. I think the threat going forward is perhaps less from that sort of activity and more from the fact that small companies in particular are now looking at AI and automation tools and thinking, okay, well, we aren't necessarily going to reduce our headcount, but by using all these tools, we can now do more with less people. And so hiring gets delayed and pushed further away. They can do more before they need to hire another person. A lot of the things that are being automated are pretty routine entry-level tasks, which in the short term is fine, but then in 5-10 years, where do your experienced people come from if there's no jobs for people with no experience? So I think there's several things we need to be looking at in terms of how we restructure work and how we also train people to be able to operate in this new environment. I think these are crucial things for leaders to think about.